The sharp, echoing crack of a palm exploding against skin ripped through the serene, marble-lined air of the Ginza Mitsukoshi boutique like a gunshot. Maya Lin, a black, divorced woman from Chicago's head snapped violently to the side. Her deep, warm brown skin instantly flared a brilliant, agonizing crimson where the blow landed. She stumbled backward, her breath hitching in her throat as her simple cotton dress snagged on a sharp crystal fixture, sending a $5,000 display of hand-stitched silk scarves cascading to the floor around her like autumn leaves. For a single, breathless heartbeat, the bustling luxury district of Tokyo went deathly, terrifyingly still. The silence didn't drift, it suffocated. Shoppers froze mid-step, their eyes darting from the shattered glass to the predatory man looming over the floor. "I told you to stay out of my sight, Maya," a voice hissed. It was a voice pulled directly from her worst nightmares. Julian Sterling adjusted the heavy gold chain resting against his branded designer jacket, his face twisted in a sneer of pure, unadulterated disdain. "Look at you. Still a pathetic charity case. You don't belong in a place like this. Did you sneak in through the service elevator to scrub the toilets?" Maya looked up, her jaw slack with shock, her almond eyes wide and trembling as she stared at her ex-husband. This was the man who had stripped her of her savings, her dignity, and her home in Chicago 5 years ago before dumping her in a foreign city where he explicitly told her she would drown. But Julian had absolutely no idea who she was anymore. He had no idea that the broken ex-wife he'd left with $12 to her name, the woman who once lived on convenience store ramen and washed her hair in public park sinks, was dead. He had no idea about the custom-fitted, flawless platinum wedding band hidden beneath the sleeve of her modest cardigan, or the 60th floor penthouse overlooking the Sumida River she had woken up in that morning. He certainly had no idea about the black titanium card resting in her plain shoulder bag, a card that carried an unrestricted line of credit capable of buying the very building they were standing in. But most dangerously, Julian had no idea about the man whose name now legally protected hers. As Julian raised his hand to strike her a second time, Maya didn't cower. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out a sleek, encrypted smartphone, and pressed a single button. It wasn't a call for help. It was a priority sell order for Sterling Global stock. Through her own hidden, brilliant trading maneuvers over the last 3 years, Maya hadn't just survived, she had secretly become the majority proxy holder of Julian's own failing empire. Before the security guards could even reach them, Julian's phone chirped a high-pitched, frantic alert in his pocket. He glanced down, his face draining of color as a notification informed him that 45% of his company's shares had just been dumped onto the open market, tanking his net worth by millions in a single second. What did you do?" Julian stammered, his hands shaking as he stared at the screen. Maya wiped a small bead of blood from her lip, her voice a low, icy whisper. "I told you, Julian. You should have checked the ledger before you touched me." He didn't see the 4 shadows in charcoal suits instantly closing off the boutique exits. He didn't notice the silent, tall figure with jet black hair and a steel-gray gaze stepping out of the private elevator. He didn't know Ren Sato, Tokyo's most feared and elusive financial titan and underworld patriarch. As the realization began to settle into the room like a freezing mist, the truth became agonizingly clear: Julian hadn't just slapped an ex-wife. He had just declared war on a king's queen. And in exactly 60 seconds, his entire world was going to go completely dark. Hours earlier, the sun had risen over the Sumida River, casting a pale golden light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. Maya sat on the edge of a bed draped in silk sheets that cost more than her father's entire house in Chicago. She ran her fingers over the fabric, her deep brown skin contrasting beautifully with the cream-colored linens. Yet, she couldn't shake the phantom sensation of the rough, polyester blankets she'd used just 2 years ago in a cramped, unheated studio apartment. Even now, surrounded by the quiet hum of high-end climate control and the scent of expensive sandalwood, Maya felt like a ghost haunting someone else's dream. She stood up, her bare feet sinking into the plush white rug as she moved toward the dressing room. Every movement was practiced, quiet, and hyper-cautious, a habit born from years of trying to remain invisible, trying not to take up too much space in a world that had once discarded her like trash. She opened the massive wardrobe to find rows of designer apparel, each piece a masterpiece of bespoke tailoring. Ren had insisted she have absolutely nothing but the best. Yet today, she intentionally reached for a modest, neutral-tone knit dress. It was clean and elegant, but it lacked the loud, obnoxious logos that the socialites of Tokyo wore like armor. She dressed herself with a restrained dignity. Standing before the vanity, Maya looked at her reflection. Her soft oval face was framed by natural 3C curls pulled back into a neat, low puff. She looked every bit the part of a woman of means, save for the shadow of quiet pain that lingered in the depths of her almond eyes. To the world, she was a beautiful mystery. To Ren Sato, she was his entire heart. But to herself, she was still a survivor, constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. Before leaving, she slipped on her simple shoulder bag and checked the hidden wedding ring beneath the sleeve of her cardigan. The weight of the diamond was a constant reminder of the man who had saved her life. Yet, she kept it tucked away, a secret treasure. She wasn't ready to be a public queen yet. For now, she was content to be the hidden wife of the city's most dangerous man. She was completely unaware that the piece she had so carefully built over 5 years was about to be shattered by a ghost from her past. Meanwhile, across the city, Ren Sato stood in his private, high-tech operations office. The heavy silence of the room was punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of a vintage clock. He stared at a massive wall of monitors, his sharp gaze fixed entirely on one particular screen that tracked a small, unassuming GPS signal moving through the streets of Ginza. To the world, Ren was a man of absolute ice, a leader whose very name commanded terrifying respect in both corporate boardrooms and the Tokyo underworld. But when it came to Maya, that ice didn't just melt, it burned with a lethal intensity. His obsession was not one of toxic control, but of a fierce, silent preservation. He knew every single scar on her heart, the ones left by the man who had discarded her. It was for that very reason he allowed her these solitary excursions. He understood that for a woman who had been completely stripped of her agency, the ability to simply walk through a store and choose an item for herself was a vital reclamation of her soul. He let her shop alone because he wanted her to feel free, even if that freedom was a carefully maintained illusion protected by the 4 elite, armed guards he had trailing her at a distance of exactly 30 yards. He watched her signal pause near the Mitsukoshi department store. Ren leaned back in his leather chair, his light-medium skin appearing pale under the sharp fluorescent lights. His jaw tightened as he remembered the way she had looked when he first found her, broken, starving, shivering in the Tokyo rain, yet carrying a fierce dignity that no amount of poverty could ever crush. He had made a silent vow to the universe that day. He would build a fortress around her, not of stone, but of absolute, terrifying power. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact. He wanted to call her just to hear the soft, melodic cadence of her voice, but he restrained himself. He didn't want to intrude on her peace. He would be her shadow, the unseen force ensuring the world never laid a cruel hand on her again. He believed his influence was total, his protection absolute. He had no way of knowing that within the hour, the very ghost he had sworn to keep away from her was about to step into the light, and that his silent vow was about to be tested in the most violent way possible. Are you ready to see what happens when a monster realizes he's trapped in a cage with a king? Don't miss a single second of this explosive story. Smash that subscribe button right now, turn on all notifications, and drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Your support keeps these intense stories alive. The air inside the luxury boutique remained suffocatingly thick. Julian stood frozen, his fingers twitching over the screen of his vibrating smartphone as the real-time financial data informed him his company's stock was actively bleeding out on the public market. His chest heaved beneath his designer jacket, his eyes darting frantically from the phone to Maya, who stood entirely still amidst the ruins of the shattered fragrance display. You dirty little thief," Julian growled, his voice dropping into a register of pure, venomous malice. He stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching loudly on the fragments of glass, invading her personal space. "What kind of back alley scam are you running? You think a digital glitch makes you someone? You're nothing. You hear me? You're a parasitic nobody who dragged me down in Chicago, and you're a nobody now." Maya didn't step back this time. She kept her jaw set, her natural 3C curls framing a face that had completely detached itself from fear. The sting on her cheek was a throbbing, radiant heat, but her mind was entirely cold. "I didn't drag you down, Julian," Maya said, her voice a low, melodic contrast to his explosive rage. "You ruined your own firm. You just needed a woman to blame it on so you wouldn't have to look at your own failures in the mirror. Shut your mouth." Julian barked, his face contorting into a jagged, ugly mask. The room didn't just go quiet, the air pressure dropped. The two middle-aged tech executives standing behind Julian subtly took 2 steps backward, their instincts screaming that the air in this boutique had just become lethal. Julian turned to his associates, his arms gesturing expansively as he tried to claw back his vanishing sense of authority. "Mr. Tanaka, Mr. Sato, please disregard this lunatic. She's a delusional squatter. As I was saying before the disruption, my distribution network is completely secure. We are ready to finalize the venture capital injection today." The Japanese executives didn't answer. Their eyes weren't on Julian. They were staring past his shoulder, toward the front glass doors of the boutique. Julian, realizing his clients weren't listening, snapped his fingers in front of their faces. "Hey! I'm talking to you. We're talking about a $10 million expansion here." Mr. Tanaka finally spoke, his voice trembling slightly as he pointed a shaking finger toward the entrance. "Mr. Sterling, look at your phone again. Look at the sender of the proxy dump." Julian frowned, quickly tapping his dark screen. The emergency notification expanded, revealing the legal name of the entity that had executed the mass short sell order against his firm. It wasn't a blind hedge fund. The legal proxy owner listed on the SEC filing was the Ren Sato Foundation. Julian's breath hitched. His eyes snapped toward Maya, his voice cracking with a sudden, sickening realization. Ren Sato? No. That's impossible. You're Maya Vance. You're a broke nobody from the South Side. Who did you sleep with to get that name on a document? "I didn't sleep with anyone for my autonomy, Julian," Maya whispered, her eyes burning into his. "I earned it. And the man who shares that name with me doesn't take kindly to his property being vandalized. Especially when that property is my piece." Before Julian could process the sheer scale of the trap he had walked into, the heavy, double-paned glass doors of the boutique didn't just slide open, they seemed to completely surrender. A heavy, predatory silence rolled into the room like a localized winter storm. The onlookers who had been holding up their smartphones to film the domestic dispute suddenly lowered their devices in a single, synchronized motion, their faces completely draining of color. The crowd parted with a primal, instinctive urgency, clearing a wide, unobstructed path from the elevator banks directly to the center of the store. Emerging from the shadows of the marble corridor was Ren Sato. He moved with a terrifying, upright stillness, his tall, broad frame cutting a sharp, flawless silhouette against the bright luxury lighting of the Ginza district. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly pressed, his jet black hair undisturbed, but his presence carried a physical weight that made the very air in the room feel thin and brittle. Julian felt the sudden shift in temperature before he even turned around. He straightened his branded jacket, his hand half-clenched in a reflex of unearned aggression as he faced the newcomer. He was a man who only understood power through loud voices and heavy gold jewelry. But the man walking toward him was power personified through absolute silence. Ren didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the store manager who was currently hyperventilating near the register. His focus was a laser, locked entirely and exclusively on Maya. As he stepped onto the marble floor where she stood, his steel-gray gaze dropped to her reddened, bruised cheek. For a single microsecond, a sharp vein pulsed violently at his temple, the only visible sign of the absolute, lethal rage boiling beneath his light-medium skin. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Behind him, the 4 security guards who had been standing idle at the exit suddenly snapped to attention, their hands moving in perfect unison to their sides. The atmosphere turned so freezing that the very breath seemed to catch in everyone's lungs. Julian took an involuntary step backward, his arrogance finally flickering with the very first true spark of genuine fear. He had been the predator just a moment ago, but as Ren Sato stopped exactly 3 feet away, the reality of the food chain became agonizingly clear. The king had arrived in his own theater, and the air itself was declaring that a massive debt was about to be paid in blood. The trap is completely set, and Julian has absolutely no idea how deep the abyss beneath his feet really is. What do you think Ren is going to do to him? Let us know your predictions in the comments section below. If you are riding with Maya on this ultimate path to justice, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends. Your engagement keeps these intense stories coming. And who the hell are you supposed to be? Julian snapped, his voice cracking slightly on the first syllable before he forced it back into a hollow, defensive growl. He stepped away from Maya, moving directly into Ren Sato's path with a puffed-out chest, trying to invade the space of a man who didn't even blink. This is a private conversation between me and my ex-wife. You're interrupting a highly critical business meeting with people you probably couldn't even afford to sweep the floors for. Ren didn't answer. He didn't even acknowledge Julian's physical proximity. Instead, his calm, steel-gray eyes drifted downward to the floor where Maya was calmly standing. His expression remained an absolute mask of disciplined stone, but the air around him seemed to thicken, pressing against the lungs of everyone in the boutique. "I'm talking to you, hero," Julian shouted, emboldened by the lack of immediate physical retaliation. He turned to the 2 tech executives behind him, looking for any shred of validation to salvage his ego. "You see this guy? Probably some mid-level floor manager trying to play white knight. Hey, buddy, let me educate you. I'm Julian Sterling. I'm the CEO of Sterling Global. I am about to become one of the most prominent international investors in this district." He turned back to Ren, aggressively pointing a finger directly at the Titan's chest. "You want to keep your little job? You better turn around and walk away right now before I make one phone call to your upper management and end your entire career." The silence that followed was suffocating. The boutique staff had completely retreated behind the cash wrap, and even the high-end climate control system seemed to stop humming. Ren finally shifted his gaze. He looked at Julian. It wasn't a look of anger or offense, it was the chilling, clinical look of a scientist observing an incredibly annoying insect right before crushing it beneath a heel. "One phone call," Ren's voice finally emerged. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, velvet baritone that carried perfectly to every single corner of the frozen room. "Please. Make it. I would very much like to see who in this city answers a call from a dead man." Julian let out a nervous, jagged laugh, his eyes darting around. "A dead man? What are you, a poet? You're a nobody. Maya only attracts bottom feeders." He sneered back at Maya. "Is this him? Is this your new little boyfriend? You went from a king like me to a corporate grunt?" Julian had absolutely no idea that at that exact second, his name was actively being scrubbed from every major registry in the prefecture. He was still posturing, completely unaware that he was standing on the absolute precipice of a bottomless canyon, and the man in front of him owned the fall. Julian smirked, raising his phone to mockingly start dialing a generic corporate number. "Watch this, nobody. I'm calling the main line of Sato Industries' local venture fund. The managing director is a personal associate of my partner's." The phone didn't even get to ring. Instead, the screen flashed bright white, and a sudden, high-frequency digital tone emitted from the speaker, piercing the silence. A large, red text banner overrode the operating system: assets forfeited under Prefecture Anti-Fraud Statute, Clause 9. Julian gasped, trying to force a hard reboot, but the device grew burning hot in his palm. Ren casually adjusted the cuff of his charcoal jacket. "You didn't check who authorized your entry visa into Tokyo, Julian. You assumed your local partners brought you here. But your local partners are entirely funded by a subsidiary of my family's holding firm. You didn't walk into a business meeting today. You walked into a sentencing." Julian turned to his partners, his mouth open to demand an explanation, but the words died in his throat. The two tech executives weren't looking at him with confusion, they were looking at him as if he were already a corpse. The sudden, sharp sound of hurried, heavy footsteps echoed from the marble corridor outside. Julian, desperately clutching his dying phone, spun toward the entrance with a sudden look of profound relief. "There they are," he gloated, casting a final, mocking glance back at Ren. "The real enforcement in this district. Watch and learn, hero. You're about to get dragged out of here in zip ties." Two senior executive directors from the primary investment firm Julian had been aggressively courting for months burst through the glass doors. These were the men who held the absolute keys to his international future, the ones he had spent weeks trying to impress with false profit margins and leased luxury vehicles. Julian stepped forward, his hand eagerly extended, a sycophantic, desperate grin instantly plastered across his face. "Mr. Takahashi, Mr. Chiba. Perfect timing. I was just dealing with this local disruption. This man is actively interfering with our..." He never finished the sentence. The two senior directors didn't even see Julian's extended hand. They didn't see the scattered silk scarves or the broken glass. Their eyes were locked with terrifying intensity on the tall, silent figure standing directly next to Maya. As if pulled violently by a single string, both powerful men skidded to a dead halt on the marble floor and dropped instantly into deep, agonizingly tense 90-degree bows, their foreheads nearly touching their knees. "Chairman Sato," they shouted in absolute unison, their voices trembling with a primal, visceral terror that seemed to vibrate the very walls of the boutique. "We did not know you were personally inspecting this branch. Please, we beg for your infinite forgiveness for our intrusion." The silence that followed was absolute. Julian's extended hand began to shake violently, his fingers curling into a useless, trembling claw as the entire reality of his situation crashed down on his chest like a lead weight. He looked at the directors, men he considered the absolute pinnacle of Tokyo's financial elite, cowering like terrified servants before the man he had just threatened to fire. Ren Sato didn't acknowledge the bows. He didn't even look down at the executives. His steel gaze remained fixed entirely on Julian, whose arrogant face had now turned a sickly, ashen gray. The branded jacket and the thick gold chain now looked like a cheap, pathetic costume on a man who had accidentally stepped directly into a tiger's den. "You wanted to make a phone call, Mr. Sterling," Ren said, his voice a low, lethal murmur that sliced through the absolute quiet. "These are the men you were going to call to end my career. They are currently bowing to my shoes. Would you like to ask them for that favor now?" Julian's jaw worked frantically, but absolutely no sound came out. The realization was a devastating, physical blow. He hadn't just slapped an ex-wife. He had struck the life partner of the man who owned the very ground he was standing on. The tables haven't just turned, they have been completely smashed to pieces. Julian's empire is dissolving in real time, and Ren hasn't even raised his voice. What do you think the final punishment should be? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this chapter, subscribe to the channel, and smash that notification bell so you are the first to witness Julian's absolute destruction in the next part. The atmosphere inside the Ginza boutique turned so thick it felt like the gravity itself had doubled. Julian stood frozen, his chest heaving as the gold chain around his neck rattled audibly against his jacket from the sheer force of his trembling. Ren Sato took a slow, measured step forward, his polished leather shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. He stopped a mere inches from Julian. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he casually slid his hand into his breast pocket and pulled out a slim, custom titanium tablet. 5 years ago in Chicago, Ren began, his voice a smooth, velvet scalpel that sliced through the absolute silence of the room. You withdrew exactly $62,000 from a joint savings account while my wife was asleep in the next room. You left her with a balance of $12.82. Do you remember that ledger, Julian? Julian's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He glanced desperately at the two senior directors, but they remained locked in their deep, petrified 90-degree bows, refusing to even draw a breath. You then sold her grandmother's antique wedding set to a pawn shop for $3,000 to cover a personal gambling debt, Ren continued, his thumb calmly scrolling down the digital screen. You took the title to her vehicle, the one she explicitly needed to get to her job, and signed it over to a predatory lender for an immediate $5,000 cash advance. Ren finally looked up from the screen, his unreadable, steel-gray eyes boring directly into Julian's frantic soul. The precise total you stole from Maya Lin, including her liquidated business assets and withheld personal earnings, was $70,000. In my world, Mr. Sterling, theft against the crown is not settled in a sluggish civil court. It is settled here. With immediate interest. You can't do anything to me, Julian stammered, trying to inject force into his voice, though his knees were visibly bucking. This is an international trade zone. I have legal protections. I'm an American citizen. I have calculated the emotional, physical, and financial toll of your actions at a compounding rate of exactly 1,000%, Ren said, completely ignoring the outburst. The current outstanding balance stands at precisely $700,000. And since you came to Tokyo to close a deal worth 10 times that amount, I know for a fact that your firm possesses the liquid capital. Julian let out a desperate, manic laugh, clutching his chest. Fine. You want the 700 grand? Take it. Wire it out of my corporate acquisition fund right now. It's a drop in the bucket compared to what I'm making today. Take the money and let me leave. Ren's lips curved into a tiny, terrifyingly cold smile. You misunderstand me, Julian. I don't want your money. I want what that money represents to a man of your hollow stature. I want your identity. Ren tapped a single command on his tablet. Look down at your wrist. Julian blinked, automatically looking down at his expensive, gold-plated luxury watch. The digital face of the watch flickered wildly, the hands spinning backward at blinding speed before the internal battery hissed and died completely. Simultaneously, the custom-tailored designer jacket he wore began to feel incredibly heavy, not from weight, but because the embedded RFID security threads tracking his VIP status across the Ginza luxury district had just been flagged as stolen goods by the store's automated inventory grid. I didn't authorize a wire transfer, Ren whispered, leaning in so close Julian could smell the faint scent of sandalwood and absolute authority. I just bought the debt collection agency that holds the global underwriting for Sterling Global's lines of credit. I didn't take $700,000 from you. I just bought your entire debt profile for pennies on the dollar. As of 3 seconds ago, I am your sole creditor, your landlord, and your boss. Julian opened his mouth to scream a legal threat, but the words were instantly choked out by the sharp, metallic chirp of the boutique's automated security gates sliding shut behind him, locking him inside his new financial cage. Ren turned his back on Julian as if the man had already ceased to exist. He walked over to Maya, his terrifying posture instantly melting into a fierce, protective grace. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently cradling her uninjured cheek, his thumb softly brushing against the reddened skin where Julian had struck her. I am here, my heart, Ren murmured, his voice cracking with a raw, human emotion that none of his employees had ever heard before. The world is balanced now. You never have to look at this ghost again. Maya let out a shaky breath, her eyes locking onto Ren's. She didn't look at Julian. She didn't look at the cowering executives. For the first time in 5 years, the constant weight of survival in her chest began to lift. Behind them, the 2 senior directors finally stood upright, their faces completely white as they pulled out their own devices, their voices frantic and hushed as they began to execute Chairman Sato's unspoken command, the total, systematic erasure of Julian Sterling from the face of the city. Julian thought he could buy his way out of a king's wrath, but Ren just bought his entire life instead. The absolute financial execution is underway. What do you think Julian will do when he realizes he can't even afford a ticket home? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all notifications so you don't miss the final, mind-blowing conclusion. The digital world moved infinitely faster than Julian's capacity to comprehend his own ruin. His phone didn't just vibrate, it shrieked. A relentless, overlapping barrage of high-pitched error tones tore from the speaker. He pulled the device out with slick, sweating palms, his eyes widening to the point of tearing as he stared at the screen. The banking application, which had proudly displayed a comfortable 7-figure corporate acquisition balance just moments prior, suddenly flickered. The numbers rolled back like a high-speed odometer. 6 figures. 4 figures. 2 figures. $0. A thick, blood-red banner slashed across the screen, account terminated. Holder classified as destitute risk. Authorities notified. What is this? What did you do to my money? Julian screamed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched plea as he frantically swiped at the glass. The screen suddenly went pitch black. A remote hardware wipe had been triggered via the Sato-owned telecommunications grid. In a matter of seconds, his contacts, his encrypted business emails, his flight data, and the very digital proof of his company's existence were permanently formatted into nothingness. He didn't even own his phone anymore. It was a useless, heavy brick of plastic and glass. Julian spun toward Chiba and Takahashi, grabbing at Chiba's tailored lapel. Mr. Chiba didn't argue. He simply slapped Julian's hand away with cold, unbridled disgust, treating him like mud on a pristine boot. Mr. Sterling, Mr. Chiba said, his tone entirely devoid of the sycophantic respect he had displayed 20 minutes ago. Our firm has officially terminated all past, present, and future negotiations with your entity. Furthermore, our compliance department is currently broadcasting a global advisory to our international partners regarding your severe ethical liabilities. You are persona non grata in this country. You can't do that. We have a signed memorandum. Julian wept, his knees finally giving out entirely. He collapsed heavily onto the cold marble floor, his expensive designer jacket bunching up ridiculously around his neck. The thick gold chain he had flaunted like armor now felt like a slave's collar, mocking his nakedness. As Julian groveled on the floor, the store's overhead public address system chimed softly. A calm, automated translation voice filled the boutique, "Attention Ginza District Security. The individual Julian Sterling is currently trespassing on Sato Holdings' private property using a revoked commercial visa. Detain immediately for immediate deportation proceedings." Julian looked up, his face twisted in horror as he realized Ren hadn't just ruined him financially, he had legally unexisted him. Because Julian's visa had been sponsored by the very subsidiary Ren just dissolved, Julian was now an illegal squatter in Japan, completely lacking a passport, identification, or a single yen to buy a bottle of water. Ren completely ignored the groveling creature on the floor. He kept his arm wrapped firmly around Maya's waist, pulling her flush against his side. He didn't look back as he guided her toward the boutique's private rear exit. "Let's go home, Maya," Ren whispered, his steel-gray eyes softening into an ocean of absolute devotion. They stepped out of the store and directly into a private, underground staging bay where a massive, armored matte black luxury limousine sat idling. The heavy, vacuum-sealed door closed with a thick, silent thud, instantly severing all connection to the chaos of the department store. Inside the limousine, the air was perfectly still, cooled to perfection and lightly scented with the familiar, deeply comforting aroma of Ren's expensive sandalwood cologne. The car pulled away seamlessly, its heavily tinted bulletproof glass turning the vibrant, neon lights of Tokyo into blurred, meaningless streaks of violet and blue. For a long, agonizing moment, there was only the quiet hum of the engine. Maya sat stiffly against the hand-stitched leather seat, her fingers still clasped tightly in her lap. The toxic adrenaline that had kept her spine straight and her jaw set inside the boutique was rapidly draining away, leaving an hollow, aching cold in its wake. Ren didn't pressure her to speak. He simply reached out his massive, warm hand and covered her smaller ones. The sheer warmth of his touch was the ultimate catalyst. A single, jagged, breathless sob escaped Maya's throat, and then the floodgates completely opened. 5 years of buried humiliation, the hunger she had hidden in the slums of Chicago, the public shame of the public park sinks, and the terrifying ghost of Julian's violence came pouring out in a violent torrent of silent tears. The man feared by every underground syndicate and corporate board in East Asia shifted instantly. Ren didn't offer empty platitudes or tell her to be strong. Instead, he pulled her entirely onto his lap, wrapping his massive arms around her with a fierce, protective urgency that bordered on desperation. He buried his face in the rich, natural 3C curls of her hair, holding her tight against his chest as she shook. "I am sorry," the underground king whispered into the dark of the car, his own voice cracking with a raw, agonizingly human emotion he never showed the world. "I am so deeply sorry I let his shadow touch your skin again." As the limousine sped toward the absolute safety of their high-rise fortress over the river, Maya finally let go of the ghost. She was no longer a survivor running from her past. She was a queen, wrapped securely in the unyielding arms of the only man who truly saw her soul. While Maya found her ultimate sanctuary in the car, Ren's digital vanguard was finishing the execution. Using the data harvested during the initial digital breach, Ren's security team completely bypassed Julian's wiped device to access his cloud storage. Within seconds, a crystal-clear, high-definition video file, captured by the boutique's multi-angle security matrix, was dispatched globally. The footage showed everything in brutal, high-fidelity clarity: Julian's sneering face, his abusive, predatory stance, and the sickening, echoing sound of his palm connecting with Maya's cheek. It stripped away his polished CEO persona, exposing the violent, pathetic coward beneath. The file didn't just land in the inboxes of his remaining corporate associates in America. It was pushed directly to his family in Chicago, his former college alumni networks, and every single high society circle he had ever tried to manipulate. As Julian sat on the cold floor of the Ginza holding cell, begging the guards for a phone call that would never come, his entire constructed reality evaporated across the globe. The sterling global stock ticker hit absolute zero, and trading was permanently halted. His American fiancée's phone buzzed with the video file, followed instantly by a text from her wealthy father: "The wedding is permanently off. Do not return to this estate." Julian had spent his entire life trying to ensure everyone recognized his name. Now, his face was the global face of a cowardly abuser. He was completely broke, utterly ruined, and entirely invisible. And Maya Lin was finally, completely free. Justice has been absolutely served. Julian thought he could erase Maya, but he ended up erasing himself from the face of the earth. What was your favorite part of this epic takedown? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching Syndicate Soul Stories. Your incredible support makes these powerful emotional journeys possible. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and turn on all notifications so you never miss our next explosive story.